position possible in bargaining with people who are much wealthier than me. It has a kind of logic to it, but in the real world, it's obviously nonsensical. And that in terms of positive freedom, the basic point is this, that the job of government and all of our jobs is to create the conditions in which we can be free agents. It's a dark negative utopia to imagine that we're automatically in that condition from birth. We're not. From birth onward, we need those conditions to be created around us so that we can be free.
Do you know that image, the very famous image from 1892 in the United States of a man in a bowler hat sitting on a rock on a hill, looking back over his shoulder at this huge expanse of a factory? So that was a deliberately staged image to contrast the individual with, that was Andrew Carnegie's homestead plant behind him, sort of asking people to say, are these two men equal in terms of the government if one of them is sitting alone on that rock and the other one owns essentially, half the town? It's a great image.
Yeah, it's exactly the right logic because when you follow the logic of negative freedom and you can't take a principled stand against the concentration of wealth and against monopolies, in practice, that is where things in fact go. And these are not theoretical considerations. These are the deep problems in the United States. The fact that our social media companies, our tech companies are so monopolistic and have generated so much wealth for so few people is one of the reasons why our democracy is crashing. The fact that our media is ever more centralized and it's ever more in the hands of oligarchs is one of the reasons why our democracy is crashing. So what seem to be like differences about philosophy are actually our instincts about freedom. If we don't have our instincts about freedom right, then practical conditions creep up very quickly, which make freedom and democracy very challenging.
So that seemed to be a pretty good segue for the news that is current right now of the degree to which Trump's war on Iran appears to be a place where a lot of individuals are making a lot of money. Do you want to get in a little bit to how the oligarchy is working right now around the world, or would you prefer to talk about Ukraine and Russia and maybe how those things go together?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at all of that and then we can just keep talking. The thing that strikes me about Trump with respect to both Iran and Ukraine and Russia is that he's functioning basically in a kind of world oligarchical space. So Trump plus Kushner plus Witkoff are the people who are supposed to be responsible for peace in Ukraine or, peace in the Middle East. It's the same group of people. And those people are in contact with other international oligarchs or political leaders, right, in Saudi Arabia or in Russia. And the decisions that affect Americans, not to mention Ukrainians and everybody else, are being made in this very tight clique of people, which is not as there's nothing especially American about it, right? The war in Iran begins with no consultation with the people, no consultation with Congress, but it does begin with consultation with international oligarchs. And so this war is a sign of how things can go wrong, not just domestically, but abroad, when that's the kind of situation you allow to create itself. And then in terms of people making money, before we talk about individual Americans, I just want to point out that the war in Iran is a total bonanza for Russia. It really couldn't be going better for Russia because the Trump administration treats the war in Iran as a pretext for lifting energy sanctions on Russia, which allows individual Russians to make money, but most importantly, allows Russia to fund its war in Ukraine. So by making war against Iran, the Trump people have made it possible once again for Russia to extend its war in Ukraine. The warmongering on one front allows the warmongering on another front to continue. And then to meet your point, it's clearly the case that people are making money on this, right? The oligarchical connections involve knowledge about what's going to happen before it happens. And I'm afraid this is actually going on a day-to-day basis where Trump's announcements are timed so as to not affect the stock market. But the people who know who's making these announcements know how to place their bets on the stock market. And I'm afraid this isn't cynicism. I'm afraid this is just how these people operate.
Well, that seems very obvious from what took place earlier this week with the huge bets that were placed about 15 minutes before Trump's big announcement that, in fact, he was in negotiations with Iran, which it turned out he wasn't. But
Yeah.
listen, as long as you're here, I would love to have you talk for people about the influence of Russia and Russian intelligence on US politics, as well, of course, as through Ukraine. And I know that's a huge topic, but I feel like really since Trump appeared in on the scene in 2015 and then was so instrumental in changing the Republican um, platform in 2016, that we have all been dancing around Russia and Russia's interests in Ukraine and in the United States. And I'd just love to hear what you have to say about that.
I appreciate your bringing that up because in a way this is how I came to US politics. The arc for me is that begins with the first Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and recognizing at that moment that Russian information operations were having an astonishing success also inside the United States, which was a signal of something larger which was changing. The the precedence of information operations over reality. If you think back to that Russian invasion, the first one in 2014, we didn't call it an invasion. We didn't call it a war. We were caught up in all kinds of contortions about what was actually happening. And we were talking about all kinds of things that were irrelevant while one major power was invading a country. And it was from there that I started to track essentially Trump because there were so many connections between Trump and the Russian elite, including, just to take an obvious example, Paul Manafort, who was the advisor to Trump and also the advisor to a Russian client in Ukraine and also an advisor to Russians. And as soon as you start to look at it, you realize that there's a long, thick web of connections here. And as I was following this after Trump declared that he was running for president, it was very clear in the Russian media that he was their guy. They made no secret about it in their own state media. And in retrospect, we could find that there was a whole set of Russian influence operations, especially on social media, to make Hillary Clinton less appealing and Trump more appealing. There's a separate debate as to whether that actually pushed him over the line or not. I tend to think that it did, but there's no question that it was there. And when we see that, it helps us to get beyond our own kind of American obsessions because we want Trump to be more American than he is, right? We want to contain him at least within familiar American concepts, but he's not contained by them. He doesn't care about the United States. He's in a world where what matters is other dictators and other oligarchs. That's what matters. Those are the people to whom he owes favors. And so now when we turn to Ukraine and Iran and these wars, Trump's conduct makes a lot more sense. There is simply no way you could explain our policy towards Ukraine in terms of the interests of the United States. There is no reason why we should be lifting sanctions on Russia. There's no reason why we should be blaming Ukraine for a war which Russia started with an invasion in 2014 and a full-scale invasion in 2022. There is no reason why we should be asking Ukraine for help in defending against drones, which we are doing, while meanwhile not blaming Russia for using drones to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure and kill civilians. Our policy is wildly tipped in a certain direction. And the reason for that doesn't have to do with the US or its interests. The reason for that has to do with Trump and the particular way he treats Putin. He treats Putin as his patron. He acts as Putin's client. And that's been true pretty much consistently for the last 10 years. The evidence for it is not in question. I mean, Robert Mueller just died, and that's a person who, if anyone ever did, deserved the recognition of his own country. But even in the Mueller report, which is one of many, many sources, it's absolutely clear what side the Russians were on, that they had taken a side. And they continue to do so. If I could just add one more thing, it's really striking that the Trump administration has essentially done away with American cyber defenses. They have done away with the institutions inside DoD and other places, which were meant to protect us from foreign information operations. And I presume that the reason why they are doing this is that foreign information operations tend to be in favor of Mr. Trump, Russian and otherwise. And I mean, to be clear, why is that? It's because they understand Mr. Trump not only as their own client, but as a kind of chaos agent who will weaken the United States, which he, of course, does.
So, can you talk a little bit about how oil fits into this? Because, of course, oil is central to the economy of Russia, but it's also central to the economies of places like Venezuela and Iran. And Trump certainly seems to be paddling in oil puddles himself.
Yeah. I mean, Heather, just take a big step back. I just can't resist it. I mean, if we were not in this petro world, right? If we were not in this hydrocarbon world, we wouldn't have to be talking about a Russian invasion of Ukraine because Russia couldn't afford to do it. We wouldn't have to be talking about wars in the Middle East. They wouldn't be happening. If we were not addicted to oil and natural gas, so much of this stuff just couldn't happen. And these are bad political choices that we are making. And it's connected to a second point, which is precisely a certain kind of oligarchy. It is not that difficult to extract oil and natural gas from the ground, or more to the point, it's not that difficult to connect that kind of economic power to political power because you just have to control the territory where the resource happens to be. If you get your energy from nuclear or from wind or from solar, that's not going to lead to political authoritarianism. If you get it from oil and gas, it does tend to lead to political authoritarianism. So all of this, like the sense that we don't have a future because of climate change and the reality of both of these wars has to do with bad choices that we are making, which only serve the short-term interests of a very small number of people. So then I think I've made the narrow points as well. Trump is stuck in a world of oil, I think partly just because he's stuck in his version of the past, also because he seems to imagine that this is just the right way to be powerful, which I think is actually a miscalculation. We are giving up future power to the Chinese by doing this because even if we obsess about oil and natural gas, a turn will be made in the energy economy. And if we're not leading that turn, that means China is leading that turn. And with Russia, as I've already said, they finance this war. They can only prosecute this war because of oil and natural gas. And the fact that we're not sanctioning Russia is just unconscionable. But the overall point is that insofar as the US is leading the charge towards using hydrocarbons in the future, we're also making just this kind of war more likely to happen.
So this really raises a real question for me as to why, I think you're absolutely right. This world that you are describing of Trump being part of or wanting to be part of a world in which he plays with international oligarchs over issues involving territory and the control of oil is one that Robert Mueller himself described in a speech when he was director of the FBI, that this was the future of terrorism and this was the future of organized crime, that it would take place across ideologies, across religions, and across countries with business leaders and criminals all working together to amass power and wealth. I think that's absolutely right. But why on earth are the rest of the Republicans, especially those in Congress, going along with this, do you think?
I, I, at first I want to emphasize the point that you're making, um, along with Robert Mueller in his speech. If there's if we want to decentralize power, like if we want to decentralize, have a democracy with civil society and pluralism, you have to decentralize the sources of energy as well. The two things go together. And I can't resist adding the point that the same is true for factuality. Like energy and knowledge are two of the basic elements of life, and they both have to be decentralized. And under Trump, both are being centralized, and this is part of the structural transformation that's going on. Gas and oil can be centralized, and with the media monopolies and with the social media monopolies, we're also seeing a kind of centralization, which makes it harder because it's harder for the individual to actually know what's going on or to believe that it's possible to know what's going on. As for the Republicans, I mean, number one, as you know very well, and you've written about it so beautifully over time, they have changed as a party. They have been intimidated. Um, they're they have been stochastically intimidated, and that party has been selected for. There's an overall historical trajectory, as you've written about, from the 19th century to the present. There's one from the 1980s to the present, but there's also the fact that this party for the last decade or so has been filtered by Mr. Trump so that the cowards have risen to the top, essentially. That's where we are, unfortunately. And so we have a party of yay-sayers, and we have a party which has made it where in the very short-term political life of a 2-year term in Congress, we have people whose entire political existence are in this atmosphere and who believe that it's simply normal to repeat the things that Mr. Trump has said. And at the end of the day, you find yourself, there are institutional changes that have to be made, but you find yourself appealing to very old-fashioned things like conscience and patriotism, because without Congress, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be happening. Without a few voices in Congress, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be happening. And it's sad to observe that we can't just get a few voices who actually care about country rather than whatever it is that's motivating them to just repeat what the president says.
Well, so you've written a lot about the rise of authoritarianism and how that's happened in different countries and where that leads. But you've also written a lot about resistance to it and what that looks like. And this nexus, I think, is where we are right now in the United
Mhm.
States. We are watching the rise of authoritarianism under Donald Trump, who, by the way, is a very weak vessel, which I think is interesting in our
Yeah,
moment. But then
yeah.
we're also seeing people trying to rise
Everyone.
up against it. Do you want to speak at all to that and what that has looked like in the past in other places?
Yeah. Although, first of all, I'm gonna insist on a quota of at least one American historical example in all of your questions because I want to learn from you about American history while we're having this conversation. So, the first thing I want to do is I want to press a point that was in your question about weakness because it's very important. We tend, American media and Americans generally tend to put Trump at the middle of everything. And I don't think he is at the
Much
middle of
maybe
everything. I think he's one cog
gambling.
in a kind of set of oligarchical relationships. He is a kind of spokesperson for people who don't want to be their
That's
own
what you get.
spokespeople. And that includes his son-in-law,
Yes.
it includes
Let's see.
Vladimir Putin, it includes various sets of people
Wow.
who Trump essentially fronts for. And he's good at that. But the point is that he's not strong the way people think he's strong. He's
Don't
not
throw them away.
telling everybody what to do. He may be telling his cabinet what to do, but there are people out there in the world who he is not telling what to do, with whom he is just
I
kind of
got something
talking
better
to.
than you.
Well, I have to ask you a question about that
Yeah.
because George Marshall at Talking Points Memo had a piece about a few weeks ago in which he talked about
See if I
how
get something better.
that group of oligarchs essentially maintains its stability by all having dirt on each
How
other.
much were these? 450?
And
Mm.
that, especially now with the Epstein files
What?
revealing how many people were in fact involved
That
in collecting dirt on each other. Is
$4?
that an accurate way to think about this?
Nose
I think it's
pass.
it's
Holding
certainly
in
the way
trouble.
it works,
City.
right? Like
Pavilion.
in East European languages, you talk about having a hook, a hook to
Thanks.
hang somebody on. And I assume that there are a number of people who have those hooks on Trump. I mean,
Oh
he
my
really does seem to be afraid of the Epstein files in a way that he's not afraid of other
God.
things. And that means that there must be some story that can be told from that data, which
Yeah.
presents him in a light which he doesn't want to be presented in. It may not be the obvious things, right? He may not be afraid of child rape. There may
It's
be other
yours.
things like
Nope, not
debts
until I
or
get it in
his
the cupboard.
connections to Russia that one could suss out of that. But yeah, you put your finger on how these mafioso
Better
states
anyway.
work. They
No,
work
mine's
because
better.
everybody has something on everybody else. And we sadly have gotten to that point. I want to mention another way, though, that Trump is weak because the point at the beginning of your question is so important. He's not popular. I mean, a lot of
Wow, they're
American
both
leaders at this point in the trajectory towards
super niggas.
authoritarianism were more popular personally than he is. He's not personally
I like that
popular.
one.
His policies are also not
Fine.
popular, and his war is not popular. I think he's in a weird place with this war. I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago on my Substack
Look.
before he started it. If he wanted to have a society transforming war, he would have to have a much bigger war than he has the competence or courage to carry out. If he wants to have these splendid little wars that make him feel good for a few hours, he can do that. And he will feel good for a few hours, but it's not going to affect public opinion, at least not the direction that he wants to. So I think he is in a moment of vulnerability, actually a moment of weakness. And as we breathlessly cover the war day to day, I think we should take a little bit of time to point that out, that he's an unpopular leader with unpopular policies, prosecuting an unpopular war as he tries to change the system. And I'm happy to talk about resistance, but I'm going
Now, get to
to,
resist.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
going to dig down a little bit deeper on that because of that
yeah.
you wrote. You talked, we talk a lot, the pundits talk a lot about the war bump, and they're talking about the
Mhm.
fact Trump did not get a war bump. And in your piece, you made a really important point about the size and scope of a war that is necessary to get that war bump. And part of it involved that people sacrificing themselves in a war that then could be used to justify the country and to glorify the leader of the country. Can you explain that to people a little bit better than I just did?
Yeah, I mean, this is a historical question, right? And it's about fascism specifically. I had it in that context. There are different kinds of wars you can fight. The American preference has been to fight wars where we don't take casualties and where we can claim that either it's not a war or it was over very quickly or we had an exit strategy or whatever. The success is mixed, of course, but that's the basic idea that we're not engaging in a way which is going to cost a lot of life. And Trump, in a way, is taking that to the extreme. Like he wants to have these 1 hour wars or 1 day wars or 1 week wars where we don't suffer, all the suffering's on the other side. And of course, that's illusory as he's learning from Iran. But that's the basic concept. I think that's where he's trapped because these consumer wars, they're not popular in America. They're not popular anymore, and they're not popular now. But so what he needs is to get up to another plateau, right? There's another plateau in war. It's where Russia is right now. It's not a good thing. It's terrible, but it's sociologically real. You get into a war for whatever reason, and it hurts you enough that people start to think it must have meaning, right? And that if we invade Iran, right, that's the kind of war that we're talking about. If not just the island, but if we invaded the country. But that's Trump's problem is that the people around him just incredibly obviously lack the competence to plan something like that. And he himself doesn't have that sort of personal courage. I mean, he has a multi-dimensional cowardice, which extends not just to himself personally, but kind of projects outward. Like I don't think he can imagine putting putting people in danger on that scale. I think it's just personally, it's more than he could take. So that's why I see him as being trapped, like this low plateau where he is with one consumer war after another, because it was supposed to be Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, right? That keeps him low. And in order to get up to another plateau, he would have to do something. He'd have to say, I'm going to take the risk of doing something that's even more unpopular, killing lots of Americans, in the belief that eventually that loss will take on a higher meaning. He can't do that. And partly it's also a moral limitation on his part because he can't imagine a loss having meaning. I mean, remember him, on battlefields in the First and Second World Wars. His constant refrain is to say, well, wait, why? Why would anyone have done this? And so that's how I see the kind of particular war trap that he's in.
Um, and I'll give you your American parallel to that, and that's the Confederacy and the U.S. Civil War. Like
Mhm.
that took on meaning because so many people died. It had to have meaning.
Yeah.
And they created a meaning that was not true at all for that war. Okay, so sorry to make you dig in on that, but that was a great piece. And I hadn't thought to ask you about it, but it felt like it was worth expounding on, especially now that we know we're moving members of the 82nd Airborne into the Middle East as of last night. So, what about resistance? What about people pushing back against this? Because as you say, it's not just about the
Mhm.
concentration of energy, and it's not just about the concentration of information. We're also seeing the concentration of industry, and we're seeing so many ways in which our freedoms, if we can go back to that, are being dramatically curtailed. How do how do people push back against this in the past?
Yeah. So number one, there has to be a notion of the future. So I'm going to talk about history. I'm going to talk about what works. But fundamentally, in order to push back, you've got to be standing somewhere. You have to have some leverage. And that leverage is your
Hey,
notion of how things should be different or better. So there are techniques, and On Tyranny is largely about the techniques. But at the end of the day, there also has to be principles. And On Freedom was meant to be about the principles. And that's why I'm grateful you began with the book. In terms of what people can do, the first thing to know is that very often these authoritarian regime changes fail. They don't have to succeed. And Trump is, historically speaking, Trump is not in a particularly strong position. And so they will try, the Bannons of the world will try to create an aura of inevitability around all of this, but it's definitely not inevitable. These things often fail. They often crack up. And I think there's a really good chance that this one is going to crack up. The second thing to remember is that it's not all on you. So people, like, it dawns on you that these terrible things are happening, and then you think, what can I do? And the answer is, yeah, sure. Like, as you alone, there's not a lot that you can do. But that's not the right way to think about it. The right way to think about it is if you do your little thing, it's going to be fine. If everybody does their little thing, it's actually going to be fine. The question is not how you save the world. The question is how you do a little thing regularly on some terrain where you know something in cooperation with other people regularly. If you get that far, it's actually going to be okay. If we all do that, it's going to be okay. At the higher political level, the way that we have an election coming, and it's not a normal election. It's an election in competitive authoritarian conditions, which means that you have to go up a hill. Like, there's a hill. You got to recognize there's a hill. Like, if you're going to climb a hill, you got to know there's a hill there, and there is a hill. They're going to talk a lot. They're going to talk about ICE. They're going to try to disrupt things, et cetera, et cetera. We have to be morally strong. We have to be quantitatively strong. We have to be legally strong. We have to recognize it's a challenge. We have to get up that hill. This is an election that has to be won, but it won't. And it will be won. I mean, I think the popular opinion is going to be clearly on the side of the opposition party, but it will only be won if we treat it as special, if we're prepared for the challenges, if we have the right attitude going forward, if we're not intimidated, and most of all, if we build a big coalition. That's what the political scientists say about this, and they're right.
Molly,
In
City.
recent
No,
examples, the way you win
hey.
these critical elections is that you have the coalition which goes from far left to center right. And so that means an opposition party, but it also means labor unions, protest movements. It means things that are to the left, to the right, or just somehow at a tangent from that opposition party. Or to make this point in a different way, this is not the Democrats' job. All right. The Democrats are the Democrats, and they are not going to be changing themselves drastically through now November. They will win those elections, but they are going to behave more or less the way the Democrats do. It's on the rest of us to do other things, to recognize the special character of the situation and to meet that moment.
I love you putting it that way because that's exactly what we saw in the 1850s. It's the same thing we saw in the 1890s and in the 19th.
Mhm.
This idea that the world must be changed and we all have to work together to do it, and we'll hash everything out on the other side. That works very nicely, I think. Are there places especially that you focus on or you think people should focus on to make their little difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's the yes, but I mean, it actually does depend on individuals. We all have different areas where we feel comfortable, and then when we feel comfortable, we should find people to cooperate with. And then when we do, then get inspired by other people, and we do better. It has to be something where you can keep doing it, where it's not just a one-off, where like if you find yourself at a protest, like I will be finding myself in 3 days, and I hope everybody watching will be as well. When you find yourself at a protest, then you meet new people and you find new ways to organize and you move on and you keep doing things. But the little things a lot of us can do involve not having that conversation about how this is not normal in a personal way, subscribing to that news source, which is actually doing proper local news or investigation and paying for it, going to that protest, finding the local groups, the statewide groups they're trying to get out the vote in November, finding candidates that you like and campaigning for them or giving them a little bit of money. Those are some little things that many of us can do.
What?
But there's also there's a
There's like a
larger
little
effort that
dogs
we can
too.
all do like together a little bit, and that is just to help change the atmosphere. Protest is part of that, but conversations and eye rolling and hugs and little actions day to day, small talk are also a part of that. That this is not a normal moment. A lot is at stake, but we can do it. That's the atmosphere we also have to try to build together.
His name is
You have a lovely piece from a couple of years ago, I think now, where you talk about what it means to live under an authoritarian state. And what really jumps out of that is the
music.
degree to which
What?
it
Is there
permeates every
music? What do you
relationship
mean?
you have. And I think what you're
All the
suggesting
lights?
is the other side of that is also true, that if you can
I don't
push
know what that
back
means. But
against
when
that
the birds
by
learn
reaffirming your right to
lullaby. You know.
speak, your right to meet as you wish, your right to make your electoral choices known, then you do change the whole tenor of society. That's
Should
fair.
move one of the two sticks
It's
down
a
so they can
wonderful
drink the water.
point, and that's I was trying to get across. Thanks for remembering that article, because we might think, well, even if politics changes, my life isn't going to change, but that's not true. When politics changes, your life does change. Suddenly, you face different. You have to do different things to get your kid into school. You have to you have to fear different things when you go out on the street. All of your relationships become impregnated with this negative force when there's authoritarianism. It's not that the authoritarianism is there and you're here. It's that you're in it and you got to deal with it. And it comes down to everything. It comes down to your family. It penetrates everything. And that is a sad truth. And a sadder truth is that when you get that far, it's hard to get out of it. But we're not that far yet. And what you say is just 100% correct. And you put it really beautifully. It's in order to return, in order to get to the vantage point where we can make better futures, we have to accept that we can make relationships better, that we're going to have to cooperate, and that there's a warmth in that. And with cooperation comes hope, and with hope comes cooperation, and that there are positive cycles that we can build together that will help us feel more powerful because we are more powerful.
So I know we each have a hard out here, so we're gonna have to go in a few minutes, and I hope we will do this again. This has been so much fun. But I'm gonna to ask you something that is actually personal to me because people
Mm.
ask me all the time, but I think it's even more true in your scholarly work. You study truly horrific things. You have studied, of course, the rise of authoritarianism, but also the horrible things that happened in between the world wars that have happened in countries that did succumb to authoritarianism and the genocide that came after that. How do you wake up in the morning and face the day? I mean, how does that not make you overwhelmed by where we are?
It's I've had to handle that question a number of different times, and I'm not sure I have a good answer for it. I wrote about those things. I wrote about the mass atrocities of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union because I felt like it had to be done. Like I felt a duty as a historian. I could see questions there that needed to be answered. And then having answered them in as best I could in Bloodlands, I went on in Black Earth to try to interpret the Holocaust in particular and to try to draw larger conclusions about it in the conclusion, at least about politics. And some of those turned out to be unfortunately predictive. Like I was worried in the conclusion about the things we've talked about ecology and about oil and natural gas. I was worried in the conclusion about the destruction of states, which is one of the causes of the Holocaust of Jews, and that's the destruction of states is also something that we've been talking about. But I think the answer is that it expands your political imagination in both directions. So it's true that
Interesting.
because of what I've written about, I can see dark possibilities. And as you kindly mentioned with respect to Russia and Trump, some of them turn out to be correct. But it's also true that I see brighter possibilities. Like I see how things can stretch in both directions. And you also see, and I would guess you share this as a historian, you also see that there are conjunctures, there are moments where individual action matters a lot and where moral action matters a lot. And that, of course, is heartening. And you try to get yourself towards those moments and try to bring other people towards those moments. So no, I mean, both as a historian and as a person, I feel much better when I feel like I'm doing the thing that I can do. And I guess if there's any way that the two things come together, it's that. Like I felt like I had to cover those issues and I did my best. And now I feel like given what I know as a historian, I have to try to be active in the places where I think matter, and then I'll feel better because I've done that.
Boy, did you put that well. Boy, that nails it right there. What we can do is we can study how societies change and we can write about it so other people see it. And that's why I stay up
Did
every
you
night
get an
writing.
appointment for Sandy at the vet yet, babe?
I'm so glad we could spend this time, and I want to do another conversation, and it's going to be more. And it's going to be more like an interview where I ask you questions, if that's
It's my
okay.
day. Be
Because
quiet.
this was mostly like this,
My
you
day.
asking me
It's
questions.
my
I want
day.
to do one where I ask you questions.
Yeah, that works fine. And I would love to do another one of these. And as I warned you ahead of time, even when I'm supposed to be being the person interviewed, I just will do it for your work.
Yeah,
And I've read your work. So it's just nice finally to get a chance to talk about it and to cover some more stuff. I mean, one of the other things that we didn't throw in here and people are asking about is Israel. And I know we don't have time to do that now, but
mm,
let's get our people to put this on a conversation again in a hurry, and we'll do it.
I'll be very happy to do that. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Great.
Thanks, Tim. It's always a and thank
Great.
you everybody for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Heather.
You probably know Vistaprint for business cards, but did you know we print everything you need to brand your business? We print banners and signs that help you stand out, and must-have merch like tote bags, t-shirts, and hoodies. Right now, new customers can get 20% off with code NEW20, because if you need it, we print it at Vistaprint.com.
There's a lot to cover today because this has been an extraordinarily unsettled week. Buddy and I were just out for a walk, and I was saying, it really feels like it ought to be Friday, and it's not. It's only Thursday. And I think partly that's because we're on this stupid, I don't know if it's daylight savings time or not daylight savings time, but it gets dark at 4, whatever, or 4:30, whatever that means here in Maine. And that always throws me off of everything as well. So there's a lot going on, but let me start to unpack a lot of that because I think I'm going to throw a lot of detail at you today because what we are seeing, I think, is a really dramatic rethinking of the American political situation in this moment, but also of the American political parties. Now, we do this periodically in American history. And I'm going to walk you through a little of this because at some level, I think people are both missing the big picture, but also paying too much attention to the little details of it in the scheme of things. But let's start with what happened on Tuesday. Now, if you remember, I talked to you Tuesday, as we were here on Tuesday, and said, no matter what happens, we're going to get up the next day and continue. And to that I hold. We're going to do that. But what happened on Tuesday was a dramatic blowout for the Democrats. And it was not only in a few key races, and it was not only in Democratic states, Democratic dominated states, which is what a lot of Republicans are trying to say right now. It was all across the country. It was from the smallest races in towns to the really dramatic races like the governorship of New Jersey and of Virginia, and the retention of 3 Supreme Court seats in Pennsylvania, um, and the California's Proposition 50, which passed by a margin of almost 2-1, Maine retaining its right to absentee voting. I mean, it was just everywhere. And that's really significant in a number of different ways. So it's significant, first of all, and what people are paying attention to is it's significant in its rebuke of the Trump administration. Because if you remember, the Trump administration took office with fewer than half of American voters having supported it. Trump won the election, but that's because the vote was divided. I mean, I don't mean to suggest if there had not been third party people that it might not have gone the same way it did. You don't really know, it because of if you have uh, lots of people voting third party, you don't know which way they would have jumped if those people hadn't been in the race. They might have voted for Vice President Kamala Harris. They might have voted for Trump. We don't know that. But we do know that more people voted for somebody other than Trump than voted for him. And yet, despite that, normally when a politician takes office knowing that the support there has just been fractional, what they try and do is they try and reach out to people on the other side and say, I'm going to represent you even though you didn't vote for me. I'm proud to do it, and so on and so forth. There's kind of a pattern to it. And you saw it last week in the victory speech by Zoran Mamdani of the New York City mayoral race. His speech was really pretty classic. I barely squeaked over the finish line here. Therefore, I am going to include everybody going forward. And I could go through a whole bunch of races like that where you have seen that. But Trump did not do that. What they said from the beginning was that they had a mandate to do whatever they wanted. And the real issue for them, as I said before the election, is they were promising everything to everyone, and it was not going to prove to be possible to be both wet and dry at the same time. That is, you couldn't both say we're going to raise tariffs and turn around and say we're going to lower prices, because by definition, tariffs raise prices, right? So they were facing a problem anyway, but then they really went overboard on Project 2025, on the attacks on undocumented and now documented and even U.S. citizens, documented and undocumented immigrants and U.S. citizens, producing these videos of, tear gassing children and driving off with a child in a car and grabbing people off the streets. And I mean, you've seen the videos, and they're important. But they've done that at the same time that Trump's economic policies have in fact delivered inflation and a much slower economy. People don't like the deportations that they're seeing. They don't like the attacks that they're seeing. They didn't like the cuts to the government that we got from the Department of Government Efficiency, and then later on from Russell Vogt at the Office of Management and Budget. There's sort of been a perfect storm here of actions that the administration claimed were part of its mandate, but that pretty clearly a lot of Americans who voted for Trump did not think they were voting for. And you can see that they were falling away from that, both by the polls that show him at the lowest place he's ever been, including in his first term, but also with the number of people who jumped on board the Trump train in 2024. A lot of podcasters, for example, who have gone quite publicly out and said, I was duped. I shouldn't have done this, and I'm really unhappy with where we are. So what you saw on Tuesday was the very visceral repudiation of what the Trump administration has been doing. And in the districts that went by far more points than people expected them to toward the Democrats. Um, what you saw actually was not just Democrats voting, not just Republicans voting for Democrats, but even MAGA crossing the line and saying we're going to vote against the Trump administration. And I want to talk before I talk about what that's going to mean, because that's the first way in which that election was important. I want to really call out what happened there because I'm not sure enough people are calling it out. So, yes, people were mad and all the things I just talked about. But what I think we saw on Tuesday was the fruits of what you all are doing. People showing up at the local level. They're showing up and they're running for office for school board. They're showing up and they're running for town offices. They're making it clear to people why a state Supreme Court race matters. They're making sure people have good information. And this is what has been missing in the United States now for decades. Grassroots movements that truly inform people of what is happening and the information that you can get from nonpartisan producers to say, hey, look, this is what's really going on. And uh, that re grasping of our democracy by ordinary people, I think is what you saw. And that's something, by the way, that the radical right developed in the 1960s and really ran with. So they could do things like get someone like Rush Limbaugh to get his followers to go complain about something. And it would look as if it were a really popular plan when in fact it wasn't. But there was nothing comparable on the Democratic side. And certainly not on the left side, which is different than the Democrats. And I think you're starting to see that now because there are so many people now working to get out the message of what's really going on in our government. And I'm really proud of that. It was really, people did it. That was ordinary people carrying the weight of democracy. And that's the second way in which what happened on Tuesday is really, really important because it shows a dramatic shift in who is getting involved in politics and where they are getting their information so that they understand things like what's going on with the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, about which I'll tell you more in a little bit. They understand what's going on and they see how to push back against it. And that's something that we haven't seen in our politics for a very long time indeed. I would say probably in the way that it seems to be developing now since the second civil rights movement, since the 1960s. And that's a really, really big deal. So you have both the short term Trump's in trouble and the longer term, we're seeing a really big change here. And then there's a third change related probably to both, but certainly to the second, and that's a generational change where, and this has nothing to do with anything that you might be suspecting I mean by this. Often you get a period, not often, occasionally you get a period in American history where one generation, for one reason or another, has had an outsized influence on politics. And there comes a time when they move off stage, either because they're older, either, the world has changed, whatever. And when that happens, new voices arise. And when those new voices arise, they begin to articulate a new kind of politics. And I think we're absolutely seeing that. And we're seeing that in this moment where you're getting all these new voices and they're talking about American issues really differently than my generation did. Now, one of the things that you've seen with that over, especially this election, but you've seen it over the last year or so, lots of people are picking their favorites and they're attacking others and they're saying, well, I can't put up with that character because of X and I can't put up with that person because of Y, but boy, this character is the best person ever. And I would caution you against doing that in the sense that what we're seeing right now are new ideas. They're new people, they're new ideas, and maybe they're going to end up changing the world, and maybe in a year you will not remember their names. What's important right now is not the individuals, it's their ideas. It's what they're throwing into the mix. And as they throw those ideas into the mix, you're going to see people start to articulate them in ways that resonate with more and more people. And that's when you can start picking whoever your person is. That person might be out there, But before you start thinking about who's going to walk off with a movement or who's going to walk off with a presidency, we still have 3 full years to go before we have to pick a president. And we're not really going to start to winnow down who those characters are going to be for at least a year. And, every time I see one of these freaking articles about, so and so is positioning themselves for the presidency, it's like, stop it. Just stop it. That comes from a book that came out in the 1960s with the idea that you can't be a president unless, your great great grandfather, I'm exaggerating, but that it takes years and years and years and years and years and years and years. And we got to prep, we got to have the right attorney general. We got, that's a genre. That's a system that drives the news. We don't have to pay attention to that. And I would urge you at this point not to worry overwhelmingly about whether your guy got in or your guy didn't get in, and whether some people people are freaking out about the new New York City mayor, Mondam, geez, Mamdani, there we go, or saying he's the best thing since sliced bread. Maybe, we don't know. He got elected by a little bit over 50%. Maybe he's the face of the future, maybe he's not, but his ideas are really important. And the new coalition that he formed is really important because it's involved new people in the process. So that's the other really big change here, is you see a generational change. And that is largely a reflection of age, but it's not always. I mean, you can have really much older people speaking for a younger group, and really vice versa. So, but there just feels like there's an age difference here, where you're getting new ideas from people who came up through the ranks differently than people in my generation. That's all to the good, by the way, because from that is what we have gotten all of our progressive eras. All right, so if that's the case, if things have changed, what's happened since? Because there's a real political problem now for the Republicans. They have two major political problems right now. One I've talked about before and may not have time to talk about again today, and that's the rise of Nazi language and admiration for Adolf Hitler within the youth in their movement. And this is causing a dramatic split between the establishment Republicans who want tax cuts and deregulation and are happy to play footsie with people who want cultural and social hierarchies reestablished, but they didn't want to go full Nazi. And they're pushing back against that other group, and that's splitting the movement, the Republicans, pretty dramatically right now. If you're watching the Federalist Society, people are quitting, people are threatening to fire people. One person got fired, and there's this big fight about should the Republican Party try and incorporate the Nick Fuenteses, the Groypers, the far right white nationalists, or should they push those people out? And they kind of need them for votes. So who knows what's going to happen there. But the other way in which the Republicans are in a real, what my mother would have called a Mel of a Hess right now, is that, remember all that redistricting they did in places like Texas? In order to redistrict Texas to turn 5 Democratic dominated districts into Republican dominated districts, they had to weaken Republican districts. That seemed like a lovely idea when they could rely on the 2024 coalition Trump had hammered together, which relied very heavily on Hispanic voters who had shifted toward Trump in 2024. Tuesday's election showed that Hispanic voters have not only turned back to where they were before Trump nailed that coalition together, they have turned against him even more than they were against him in 2020, likely because of the deportations. And they've just redivided everything, which means that in a true blowout blue wave election, they might have just handed a bunch of seats to the Democrats. And if you don't think they're nervous about that right now, you want to look at what they're starting to say about the other redistricting plans they had in mind, where already states are saying, maybe that wasn't said, maybe we don't really want to do that. So they've got that problem right there. But they also have another big problem going forward in that, as I say, Trump's big the reason that lawmakers went along with whatever he wanted was because he could turn out voters. He could win elections. He never really had coattails. So this was always a little, and that means he could never really drag people along behind him. But it was pretty clear, yes, Tuesday, that people were voting against Donald Trump and against Trumpism. So ever since then, you've seen a real shift in American politics, and because of that, things look very unsettled. So the last 3 days have been just ping, 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 ping everywhere as people are trying to reboot. So one of the things you have seen is the Republican Party, especially as it is represented by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, has all of a sudden been out there saying, you know what Republicans are all about? We're about affordability. All of a sudden, have you seen the word affordability
No, thank you.
everywhere? All of a sudden, like affordability, affordability. You saw Donald Trump going out there and saying that it's cheaper in 2025 to buy Thanksgiving dinner at Walmart than it was in 2024, only to be corrected to say, well, yes, but in 2024 there were 21 items in that meal, and in 2025 there were 15, and in 2024 they were brand named items, and in 2025 they are Walmart brand items. There's this real attempt to say, please pay no attention to what your grocery bill looks like. They're really,
What?
everything really is much cheaper
I
than
can't
most
believe
of
how
us
big that dog
really
is.
care about. We care about healthcare, which is, I mean, it's all just
Yeah,
mind-boggling, considering that they're insisting that they won't negotiate over the extension of the premium tax credits that make healthcare affordable for people on the Affordable Care Act marketplace. But you see this real attempt to pivot and say, never pay no attention to what we did for the last 9 months. Now we're all about affordability. You're also seeing Trump. Well, let me go back. You're seeing the Democrats being like, hey, just a minute here. You thought you had all the cards, and oh boy, it looks like we hold a lot of cards. So, first thing Wednesday morning, um, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's a Democrat from New York, and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who's a Democrat from New York as well, wrote an open letter to Donald Trump and said, we demand that you meet with us to negotiate an end to the shutdown. We're ready anytime, any place. We are here. Trump at the same time. So you got to remember
Hey,
a
you
lot of players here. Trump at the same time went the other direction. Trump says, okay, I'm going to talk to the Senate Republicans now. Because remember, he's been saying to the Senate Republicans, under no circumstances can you negotiate with the Democrats over ending the shutdown, which is kind of bonkers, by the way. There's always a negotiation. This is just him saying, I want to do everything my way. But he goes and he talks to them and he admits that the shutdown is hurting the Republicans, which, is pretty clear. And then he says the way to handle this now problem for the Republicans is to get rid of the filibuster and jam through the Senate and through the House of Representatives an end to mail-in voting and really dramatic changes to voter ID, which, by the way, is I mean, I'm not going to go into the issues with any of that right now. But what he's trying to say is, and he actually did say it. He didn't. I'm not just putting words in his mouth. He said, if you do this, the Democrats will probably never hold office again, and we don't have to worry about anything.
Look at my new birds.
And it's
Birds.
well,
New birds.
the Republican leadership that is not in the White House is like, oopsie poopsie, we got a problem here. We got to figure out ways to reattract voters by saying we care about affordability. He's saying, screw them all. Just get rid
300
of
bucks.
Democratic voters
No.
and we don't have to worry about anything. In other words, he's saying, give me more power and we'll take care of this whole problem.
We're gonna give them a bunch of medicines
But if you're a
before we
Republican
put them with
senator,
all the others.
are you going to put your eggs in that basket?
You never know what other
And the
people.
answer to that was clear immediately after it, when Mitch McConnell, who does not usually talk to reporters in the hallway, and who recently, when he tried to do, when he actually fell over, said to a Bloomberg News reporter, "We're not going to do it."
How much?
I mean, they didn't even discuss it. He just did not happen it. And I will, somebody asked if I'd give you the history of the filibuster again. I will sometime, but probably not. Well, probably not today because there's so much else to cover. But I have talked about it a lot before. So if you really care, you can go look in old videos. But
Ryan,
I'd be
you
happy to
something
do it again.
down
In
here.
fact, I should do an explainer on one of those.
Send y'all the limit, right?
Anyway,
Yeah, we go with them.
so all of a sudden, you've
Go.
got
No, but also.
recognition in the Republican Party that there's a real problem.
And
And you've got Trump all of a
Okay.
sudden looking like a lame duck, looking like, he's not going to continue to be powerful. And yesterday, which was Wednesday, you could see the palpable fear, I think, on his part when in the course of a little over 3 hours, he posted on social media more than 33 times, or more than 30 times, I think it was 33 times, and posted these videos that were essentially seemed to be him reading his posts from social media, but had to be repeatedly cut, and he's slurring his words, and it was not a good performance. On the same day that the on sheets of paper, what seemed to be sheets of paper, appeared to have the words Oval Office written on them outside the Oval Office, which people recognize pretty quickly as a technique to make sure people who are having memory issues can remember where to go. And then he gave a speech in which he complained about how many refugees had come to Miami from South Africa. And then he kind of riffed on that for a while. I mean, he really didn't look good. And then he had some problems today as well. One of which was I'm not sure that there was a medical emergency in the Oval Office, and that stuff just happens everywhere. I mean, it just happens. And my best to whomever the person was. He was a drug executive, I guess. And by the way, the White House is a very, very, very good medical team, and medical services and all that. So if you're going to have a medical emergency, it's not a terrible place to do it. Um, but what was really interesting about that was that Trump had really not been paying attention to what was going on. He'd been kind of slumped in his chair. And when the emergency happened, he just seemed a little out of it. And I posted on my Facebook page an image that a reporter took. He was the last person out of the room. There's actually a video of him taking the picture because Trump had stood there looking at the emergency. I mean, there's nothing he could do about it, right? That's the best thing to do is stay away, right? But then he just kind of turned around and he was just standing there, and it was a really I was fascinated by it because it was like already people are talking about it being an award-winning photograph, and that was my reaction to it as well because it was such a there was so much in that image of everything that had happened this week, and it just you should see the image, the really interesting image. So you got that going on. If you're a Republican lawmaker, are you going to tie yourself to that? Because I'm not done yet. That was just Tuesday and into Wednesday. So the other thing that happened in yesterday was that uh, the um, as the administration is trying to talk about now, it's going to focus on affordability and Thanksgiving's going to be cheaper and all that. A new jobs report came out today showing that the nation has there have been 1.1 million layoffs since Trump took office, or since the beginning of 2025. And of course, we're not at the end of the year yet, which is the kind of numbers that look quite bad. And then we also got yesterday, the Supreme Court took on Trump's tariffs. And that's really important because for many reasons, but in terms of Trump's power, it's important because the tariffs are his signature economic issue. And the Constitution gives Congress alone the power to manage tariffs, but Trump took that power or claimed that power under the International Economic IEPA, International Economic crap, I don't remember the others. It's IEPPA, International Economic something something Act. Anyway, something Protection Act. I'm getting there. Can't remember what that last P is. And the idea is that in case of an emergency, the president can declare an emergency and then do economic stuff to take care of that emergency before Congress can hop back into session. Tariffs are never mentioned in IEPA, but uh, but Trump claimed that ability to create these tariff wars based on that emergency power. And three lower courts said, that's unconstitutional, dude. You can't do it. So he went to the Supreme Court, probably hoping the Supreme Court would go along with him. And those hearings were yesterday. And a couple of things happened to them. One, the government's attorney admitted that the American people pay tariffs, which is an issue. And it really looks as if the Supreme Court justices are not, in fact, going to sign on to that. They're going to say that he did assume unconstitutional power. And that's going to be a huge blow across the board to him, to the point that today, when a reporter said to him, do you agree that the American people pay the tariffs? He switched the justification and he said, well, no, I don't think they do. Well, they may pay a little, but he said they're really about national security because I'm using them to stop wars. And if I don't stop these wars, Americans are going to have to fight in those wars. That's completely new stuff, but he's clearly trying to fall back on something that he thinks the Supreme Court might agree with because they've given him a ton of latitude over national security issues. But so that's happening on Wednesday, and I am not done. The Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, has said that because of the shutdown, that as of tomorrow, the administration is going to have to draw back dramatically how many flights it permits to travel, just for safety reasons. More power to them, by the way. I'm all for air safety, but it is a really bad time for that to be happening in the lead up to the busiest travel week of the year, which is Thanksgiving week. And then we've also got a number of court cases going on all this week. And the one that people have been paying some attention to, or I guess maybe all of them they've been paying attention to, but one is the case of a guy named Sean Dunn, who is a young man who was a paralegal at the Department of Justice, and who threw a sandwich at a federal officer. And the Department of Justice determined to try to make that literally a federal crime, and a grand jury would not return a verdict or not return an indictment of that it was assault. So they went forward with something they didn't need a grand jury indictment for, which was a misdemeanor charge, which carries up to a year in jail. But that went to trial this week. There was jury selection on Monday, and the trial was Tuesday, Wednesday, and it ended this afternoon, or the verdict was this afternoon. And the administration just looked idiotic. That is, the person who caught the thing in his chest, he had a bulletproof vest on, and he claimed that it had exploded on his front, but then there's pictures of it still in its wrapper. And it just looked idiotic. It really did. And people were making all these puns. Even I got in on the pun game, right? And I'm not really very good at puns. And then so it just looked incredibly stupid. And then this afternoon, the jury acquitted the young man of the misdemeanor charge of um, what was it? It was what they said was he had thrown a sandwich. What the government said is he had thrown a sandwich, and I kid you not, they said he had thrown it at point blank range. And the testimony was the guy who got hit by the sandwich. His friends kept teasing him and gave him plushies that he kept in his office about with a sandwich. And I mean, it just did not look good for the federal government. But then there was another one as well, another case as well today, two other cases today. One where in Chicago, where Judge Sarah Ellis has been trying to stop the extremes of the federal agents under Greg Bovino, who are active in what the federal government is calling Operation Midway Blitz. And today she made a sweeping order stopping them from using the tactics they're using, the tear gas, the rubber, the pepper balls, and so on. And came right out and said the federal agents, including Bovino, had lied to her. and that they are deliberately hurting people, and that this is not going to be acceptable any longer. And then we also had a U.S. District Court judge in Rhode Island, a judge named John McConnell, saying that the administration had ignored his order to fund SNAP by Monday or Wednesday of this week. If you remember, they said, well, we'll do it, but the paperwork's going to take weeks or months. So then Trump came out and said, we're not going to do it till after the shutdown. And then the administration came out and said, oh, yes, we are. He didn't mean that, but it's going to take a while. And he came out and said, you deliberately are withholding this money from children, he said, for political reasons. That is unacceptable. And you must fund SNAP in full by tomorrow. That is, send the money to the states for distribution by tomorrow. So that's yet another rebuke of the administration in a really major way. And so you can sort of see the power, people starting to push back on the power there. And at the same time, you're seeing in the news reports of Republican lawmakers who are really uncomfortable with what comes next, because again, they've kind of been coasting, sort of, they didn't want to cross Trump and he can turn out voters and so on. And that all just blew up on Tuesday. So one of the things that came out today was a rumor, and the rumors are really interesting and they're important because you can't ever take them at face value. But what you should take at face value is that somebody is leaking that to the press to put pressure on someone. And one of the things that came out today is that allegedly Republican lawmakers are very concerned that the Epstein files are worse than we know. Well, why are they saying that? I mean, why is that going in front of the press right now? Well, they're probably trying to put pressure on Johnson to go ahead and reopen the House and to swear in Adelita Grijalva. He's not doing that because he doesn't want her, at least seems not to be doing it because he doesn't want her to be the final signature on the discharge petition that will require a full vote on the release of the Epstein files. They might be doing it simply to say, hey, dude, we're pushing back at this point against Trump. Who knows? But when the Republicans are putting the comment into the public sphere that they are concerned about the Epstein files. And that's not the people that have been out there in front, like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massie, either respectively from Georgia or from Kentucky. These are sort of nameless Republicans. That's important. And then, as I say, you just don't know what way a lot of them are going to leap. So one of the things that's happening tonight is there is a vote in the Senate on the war powers, whether or not Trump has authorization to continue these what are seemingly lawless strikes against Venezuela. And in the past, two Republicans jumped to vote with the Democrats to give a vote of 49 against Trump's authorization and 51 votes in favor. But it's going to be really interesting tonight to see what senators do. It's because it's largely a symbolic vote. The House is not going to take it up. And it's going to be really interesting to see if they are willing to continue to support these strikes, which certainly look lawless from the perspective of a number of, including government lawyers, and certainly lawyers who know a lot about the War Powers Act, including Brian Finnegan, who was the War Powers attorney under Trump in his first term and under Obama before that. So watch the Senate tonight and see if they're going to continue to back Trump or if they too are going to start to slide away. All right. So I'm sorry. The other thing I briefly mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's another fabulous person to watch. And what I mean by that is, again, she is, I am certainly not advocating anybody change their opinions about Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think she too sees that the MAGA Republicans are falling apart. She wanted to run for Senate. Trump wouldn't back her because he said she was. I don't know if he said this, because she was so extreme, she had no chance of winning a Senate seat in Georgia, even in Georgia. And all of a sudden she has been sounding as mainstream as it is possible to send. Even today, she congratulated um, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on her time as Speaker, because Pelosi announced today that she would not run for reelection. Really interesting timing, because uh, right after this dramatic event on Tuesday. But also, what you're seeing is a number of Republicans saying, "Well, she knew that they don't stand a chance in the midterms." Come on, dude. She's 85 years old. This was her leaving exactly on her own terms. And Marjorie Taylor Greene complimented her on her time as House Speaker. And someday I probably will write about Pelosi as House Speaker if I haven't already, because she was one of the all-time greats, one of the most powerful speakers in American history. Whether you liked her or hated her, she used that office in truly impressive ways. House speakers are interesting, and we have really weak House speakers too in our past. Although Mike Johnson's given the worst one a run for his money, I will say that. I don't have time to go more into that right now, because I want to end up with people said, how do we keep this momentum going? And here's what I would say to you is I'm going to say the same thing to you now that I said to you on Tuesday. We get up tomorrow and we do the same thing that we have been doing, because it's not about an election. None of this is just about an election. It's about recreating American democracy for the future. And that means continuing to support your community, help out people who are hurting because of the SNAP cuts. And you know what? Even when the SNAP cuts come back, people still need food to eat. And you know what? Talk to the people who are managing food security in your areas, and find out what they need and what would be a good thing for people to have. What would be good things for people to have in the going forward into the winter months and into the holidays. And make sure that you are contributing whatever is good for whatever is your skill set to your community, because that's how we rebuild democracy from the bottom up, which is exactly how it's going to have to be done. Continue to circulate good information about what is really happening out there, so that people understand what truly is going on with this shutdown. And there are, I'm not going to even say who it was, but people are saying all kinds of crap right now about how the Democrats are the party of communists, and I saw the word jihadists. That's just stupid. Like stop with that stuff. And you can push back on that stuff on a person to person level. That's how you convince people. But also continue to stay involved with people at the local level, people at the state level, and people at the national level, talking about things you care about, talking about things that you would like to see change, because you're starting to see pushback. You're starting to see people saying, hey, wait a minute, why are you talking about a a ballroom in where the east wing of the White House used to be, when 42 million Americans aren't going to be able to put food on the table?
Holy
I
crap,
know
here's our
you,
first real drought.
speaking personally, I
25
would
days.
so much rather my tax dollars go to my neighbors than go to a ballroom or Trump's ally Javier Milei in Argentina. So those sorts of conversations are the ones that we must be having right now. And throw your voice into that conversation and support politicians who say the kinds of things and promise the kinds of things that you care about. Like I say, going forward, they might become the people who our great grandchildren read about in the history books, or people might forget about them altogether. But those voices are important right now, because they are helping us to re-envision a new country. And this is always where I talk about the 1850s, and maybe I'll start pushing us into the 1890s, because I could do the same thing then, or the 1930s. But in the 1850s, when ordinary Americans, and remember at the time, basically it was only white men who could vote, and not all of them even, when they really realized that they had lost their democracy, or had almost entirely lost their democracy, to an oligarchy of a very small group of elite Southern enslavers who were trying to spread human enslavement across the country and turn the country into a world of, a very small group of people in power, and everybody else having to work for them either as wage laborers or as enslaved people. Americans woke up and they started to articulate both that they didn't want that to happen to their country, and that they cared enough about democracy that they were willing to take a stand. And when I talk about the people that you will forget about in the future, most of you have probably never heard of Anson Burlingame, who was a representative from Massachusetts, one of the most important voices in the 1850s, but one whose career never matched really his rhetoric in those early days. But you heard more and more people, and as they articulated more and more their concerns, but also what they wanted the government to do. They wanted it to protect equality before the law. They wanted it to give people equal access to resources, including education. The more that people talked about that, the more politicians listened. And one of the politicians who listened was Abraham Lincoln. 1854, Abraham Lincoln is nobody you've ever heard of. He's had one undistinguished term in the House of Representatives. He's a corporate lawyer, married to his wife, hanging out with his law clerk, Billy Herndon, and he's nobody that had the world been on an even keel anybody would have heard of. But he listened to what people were saying about democracy, and he listened to what people wanted, and he began to articulate a new vision for America. And he became Abraham Lincoln. But the trick to remember is that he was brilliant for sure, and he knew the law, and he knew the classics, and he was able to write a speech. But the American people created him. He listened to them and he articulated what they were thinking in a new way. And that's what we're doing right now. That's the work that we are engaged in right now, is creating our next set of leaders to take us forward into a more just, healthier 21st century. And one I just have to throw in here that can deal with the crises of climate change and migration that it's going to bring. Those absolutely need to be addressed, and we need to have the people who can articulate the vision to do that. And right now, we're the ones who are making that happen. So keep doing everything you're doing. We're going to continue to push harder and harder. But I don't know about you, if you've noticed this, it's getting easier. We're developing those muscles. You know who to call when you have a question. You know how to get involved in things because you've done it before. Those are all muscles that we are developing. And as we do that, and as more and more people join us, it will get easier to do and more people will be part of it. And we will have developed the kind of a strong democracy that we kind of had let go over the past many decades. And that will be all to the good. So anyway, congratulations on Tuesday, and let's get up tomorrow and do it again.
All right, we are coming up live here in just a minute. We're going to give people a second or two to pop on, and away we go. Hello, everyone. I'm JVL here with my Bulwark colleague, the great Catherine Rampell. Catherine, how are you enjoying America's new golden age? Things are popping. Everything's great.
It feels a little less golden and a little more rusty, I guess. I don't know what the right analogy would be. But yeah, not looking so hot, I would say.
Okay,
How are you enjoying things? Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I love it. I love it all so hard. We're going to start off with a quote from the CEO of BlackRock, president of BlackRock, Rob Capito, who yesterday, I think it was in Bloomberg, was quoted as saying, yeah, I think the markets are way underpricing the war risk. Here's what he said. Oil may still, I'm just reading from the story. Oil may still spike to $150 a barrel, even quote, if we announce tomorrow that the war is over. And he then said it would take time for the disrupted supply chains to return to capacity. Here's Capito. What if this disruption is a week, 6 months, a year? What is that going to mean for the companies I own? My biggest concern is that people aren't looking at this. They're just making the assumption that there will be an optimistic outcome. Simultaneously, same day, we had a story in Bloomberg that inside the Trump administration, they are wargaming. What happens if oil goes to $200 a barrel? I mean,
Don't you
hear
wish
these
they had
two
war
things
gamed that like a month ago?
before
Yes,
before the war.
before the
Often you
war.
do your war games before the war, not mid-war. Then it's not really a war game, is it?
No, it's a war. Yes.
War.
it's a-
So,
yeah.
I mean, our colleague Tim Miller has been running around like a crazy person saying, I feel like everybody is underestimating the economic impacts here. And on the one hand, I understand that because America is actually better positioned to weather these sorts of shocks than many other countries. Um, on the other hand, I do get the sense that American markets in general are underestimating what's going on. Um, and yet there's all sorts of like bad signals. It's not like everybody's thinking, hey, everything is great, but people are thinking that it's bad. We have some consumer confidence numbers we'll get into later. We have, again, oil prices going way high.
Recession risk is rising.
Recession risk is rising. Right. So I guess talk to me, Catherine, on the very big macro question of are are the markets and people properly sort of understanding the risk curves in front of them, or no?
Look, I am not like a day trader. I hold, broad index funds like the S&P. I don't so I guess this is my way of saying like I'm not putting money on the line here, and
Agreed.
ethically it would be
Not investment advice.
correct. It is not
Fair.
investment advice, and take with a grain of salt besides, because like I don't have skin in the game in the way that people who are actually making trading decisions on this information, maybe they know something more than I do. But yeah, it seems like there's a little bit too much of a sanguine response to what's going on in the world right now, particularly after Trump very obviously says things to like jawbone the market to try to get people to calm down, right? It's like, why does anybody take him at his word when he'll like periodically say, "Oh, don't worry, it's almost over. We're almost done. I want to get out of there soon." But there's like no actual evidence that he has presented that he has a plan for extricating the United States from this war, or for that matter, from extricating the globe from this huge like economic quagmire that he has created by disrupting not just oil markets, but like everything in the world at this point. And it's really, again, like I'm not a day trader, so maybe these people who have money on the line are smarter than I am and they see something that I don't. But I don't get what the off ramp is here, and I don't understand what market participants think the off ramp is here. Like to get to the point of that BlackRock quote, the BlackRock CEO, president,
President.
president, his quote: "If the war ended today and the Strait of Hormuz were magically reopened today, which not likely, you still have a huge amount of damage that has been wrought already in the form of like a bunch of companies in the Gulf, excuse me, countries in the Gulf have either reduced how much oil they are producing or ended it entirely, oil, gas, natural gas, other products.
Turned
because
off
they just
their
ran-
aluminum smelters.
Right, exactly. They ran out of storage for stuff because they couldn't get ships through the strait, and they could not, like in the aluminum smelting example, natural gas was just getting too expensive, so they had to turn off the smelter, and that's going to take whatever it is, months or a year to turn it back on. It's not just like flipping a switch. So there are a bunch of reasons why that disruption alone means that like there's like a hole in the supply that will take take a while to refill. On top of that, you also have some damage to the infrastructure already. And that's not just about like how long it takes to turn back on the aluminum smelting plant. It's like you have an oil refinery that got taken out. And once that is gone, it is gone. And so you have to, the largest natural gas
Music right here?
processing
Yeah.
plant in the world, which is in Qatar, got bombed by
Yep.
the Iranians. And they're
Lost 20% of capacity, 17% of capacity. I think,
yeah,
right?
so that's huge.
That's
and
4% global capacity, by the way. That's how big this place is. So a fifth of this one field's capacity is 4% of the entire world's capacity for producing natural gas.
So, in the United States is somewhat insulated from that. Like we produce so much natural gas ourselves, we are a net exporter, but it's still a global market, and there are going to be more
Commodity.
yeah,
Prices go up
commodity.
everywhere. They go up here too.
Right.
Right.
So, so it's really hard for me to understand why I don't want to say there's like this euphoria, but again, there's just like almost this indifference, nonchalance about some of this long-term damage that is happening. And I don't really understand why, or at least why it would be comforting to hear Donald Trump say, don't worry, it's going to be okay.
Let me trot out a theory.
Yeah.
Because my theory is if nobody believes Trump when he says these things,
Okay.
everybody believes it's market manipulation, but they believe the market manipulation will work.
Mm-hmm.
And so they pile in because there's like a little bit of money to be made short term.
Okay. Yeah.
So
That's
when Trump tweets something out, people don't think that he like actually peace is coming, right? He says, "Oh, we're really close to a deal," but they think, "Oh, the market will run with it," and so it becomes like a self-reinforcing thing, right?
yes.
If everybody in the market thinks that the market's going to react this way to this news, then it's going to, and so you wind up with it. It gets very noisy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and
That's a good theory.
yeah,
But at some point, like somebody should be taking the other side of that trade, though, and
right.
maybe they are. In that, they should be assuming, okay, well, if it's all like puffery, there's no there, that at some point the reality will catch up with the market, and so they should be shorting everything, right? I mean, I guess you can get the time frame wrong.
Yeah.
Keynes famously predicted that markets were going to crash, but you can run out of liquidity before your bet is before you win the bet essentially,
Yeah.
and lost a lot of money. So maybe it's possible there are people who are realizing the greater fool theory, that somebody else will be willing to take, will believe the bullshit essentially, that eventually that's gonna stop holding. But I don't know. It's
It's also
confusing to me.
scary. It's also scary to get involved in trying to take the other side of things
Mhm.
when it's clear that one side is consciously manipulating the markets.
Okay, so I've got the cable here. It's coming out of the window. I'm just going to go ahead and walk on over to the transfer switch inlet. It's going to be a little hard to do this with one hand, but we're going to get these prongs aligned. Guys, if you're running a generator at night during an outage, there's three things that you have to be very concerned with: noise, safety, and theft. Generators are very loud. They draw attention, especially during the night when sound travels further. They produce carbon monoxide, and if you're asleep in your bed, you need to have a carbon monoxide detector, or you may not even know if this deadly gas is seeping into your house. And probably one of the more important ones is theft. At night, during an extended outage, people know who has a generator and who doesn't. They announce their presence. And when you're asleep and you're unaware of somebody in your yard, they might just take the opportunity to steal this. Generators play an important role, and I have many of them, and they serve a purpose, and I absolutely love them and use them all the time. However, during an outage, I want to be secure. So I have a different device that I'm going to introduce you to that allows me to power all my critical loads in my home during the 6 or so hours that I am asleep before I need to come back outside and fire up this generator. Let's go inside and take a look at what I'm talking about. Now, look, I want to be clear. Generators are incredible tools, and I own many of them. If you've watched the channel, I own from 11,500 watt tri-fuel units all the way down to small 1,600 watt generators and everything in between. But the good thing about a generator is I run it during the day. I can see it, I can keep an eye on it, I can hear it, I can refuel it, and I can monitor it. But once the nighttime comes and I'm asleep and I'm no longer awake, I can't really hear it. I can't monitor it if there's a problem, if it runs out of fuel, if somebody's trying to steal it. I have no idea. And that's why I don't want to run the generator at night. I want to put it away, lock it in the garage, and know that it is safe and secure and no prying hands are going to get to it. That's where this comes into play. Guys, this is the PEC.
Yes.
Right. When there is obviously a lot of insider information going on, and we've seen it from Kalshi to Polymarket to oil futures, right? Did you
Mhm.
was $580 million in the oil futures that came out right before the tweet, like 16 minutes, 17 minutes before the tweet. Again,
Stock futures and oil futures, actually.
yeah,
Somebody or somebody's got very rich off of
right.
that
And
information.
so when you know that that is happening out in the world, I mean, it just seems like it's tremendously risky to say, oh, I'm smarter than everyone else. I'm going to take the other side of this, because you could get burned real hard by people just manipulating the markets around you. And
Yeah.
I don't know. So we have a couple things to talk about. One of which is consumer sentiment. This is great. Expectations. What was the economic outlook? We now have people expecting business conditions to go down in both the short run and the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And inflation expectations are way up. Short run inflation now, people are expecting 4.5%. The who is it, OEC or somebody?
OECD, yeah.
The
They-
OECD put out, what was their guess? Do you have that at your
They
fingertips?
guessed, my recollection is that they said 4.2% inflation in the US over 2026. So obviously well above, in fact, more than double the Fed's target of 2%. So yes, that's headline inflation. So that includes energy prices, obviously. And the Fed normally strips out what's going on in energy prices and in food prices because they're so volatile. But it doesn't mean that consumers, A, don't feel it. Like consumers care about what happens to energy and food prices.
Right.
And B, energy prices also affect the price of everything else, right? Any goods that need to get shipped, any products that need to get manufactured, that requires fuel of some kind. So
anything that has plastic packaging, as you wrote
anything,
last week.
yes, anything that has plastic packaging, fertilizer, which is made, parts of it are made from petrochemicals. And so you have fertilizer prices going up, which again leads to higher food prices, among other things. So yeah, so lots of signs that prices are going up. I think we also have a chart somewhere showing what the markets think.
That Bloomberg business terminal chart, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. Do you have it?
Can we throw that up, guys?
Oh, no, not that one.
No, that's the Brent crude. It's the one at the very
Anyway.
bottom of our document. Anyway,
It's but basically, you can kind of back out from how treasuries are trading what market participants think inflation is going to be, and it suggests that they think, yeah, that's the one. It's like an ugly chart. Yeah.
Line go up. Line go up, Catherine.
Yeah, investors are now betting overall U.S. inflation over the next 12 months will surge above 5%. So yeah, so that's this chart is from March 20th, a week ago, but I looked up the data. I don't have a Bloomberg terminal anymore, alas, but I had a friend look it up for me yesterday, and it's still about 5%. So just to give you a sense of like what, again, people who have skin in the game think that we are going to have pretty high inflation, mostly driven by energy, but not exclusively driven by energy, because as we've said, like so many other supply chains are conditional on this. So it's a weird set of facts to be forcing into reality leading into a midterm, I would say. Normally, presidents would be doing everything that they can, turning over every rock, trying to find ways to reduce gasoline prices. And obviously, that is not what this administration is doing.
Can we throw the recession forecast up on there, guys? Because that's the other thing that's interesting, the sort of oil price shocks and their correlations to recessions.
Yeah, so it's not a prediction per se, but it's showing that, like, yeah, it's when energy prices get very high, more often than not, I would say, you end up having a recession, but not always. Like we had you can see on the chart, we had a huge price spike in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. That led to much higher oil prices, and we didn't have a recession then. So it's,
you have Joe Biden at the helm, though. So
we did have Joe Biden at the helm. And we released a lot of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which Donald Trump, among others, were very critical of at the time. And now, of course, we have the administration today trying to do the same thing, but a little bit late. I've asked different people who are energy experts, like, is there something that they could have done to keep gas prices from going up so high, aside from not starting a war in the Middle East? And one of the responses has been, well, they could have like started releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve a little earlier because it takes a while for it to flow literally through the market. So there are things that they could have done that they did not think to do for whatever reason. This administration is clearly not known for its planning capacity. So, yeah, I mean, besides the fact that oil prices are going to lead to higher consumer prices down the supply chain, that also leads to a higher risk of recession. And that's because, well, for a number of reasons, but like when consumers are spending more on gasoline, and today they're spending, I think, about $400 million more per day than they were.
Yeah, not
at the end of
$400 million per day, $400 million more per day.
Correct. That's from
Just want to make
gas
sure people
buddy.
understand you.
Yes, because gas has gone up by more than $1 since the war started. So collectively, based on how much gasoline American consumers buy, they're spending collectively $400 million in additional spending per day. That's $400 million that they do not have available to spend on other goods and services, right? Maybe they're no longer going out for dinner, or they're no longer buying their kid the nicer birthday gift, or whatever it is. That's consumer spending that gets diverted to energy. And so you have all of the companies that would have been patronized by consumers losing out.
Right.
So then they have to pull back. Maybe they have to lay off
Okay,
workers.
I think I'm
Their workers
done.
ultimately and cut back